go and loot civilian properties and give to the family that this is what the late left, including old gomasi for women, saucepans and everything. I said, really? That yes, that's what we used to do. Of course, it was open that roadblocks and everything, they would say identity card on one hand, money on the other. And no, good enough, there was no NTV. Nothing would be reported. Did you know, Priscilla, that if you want to understand a society, part of the societal research, I don't know how doctor does it, can be seen even in the songs that people sing. A song in a community can reveal. For example, if you're in a hunting society, you'll sing about the birds, the lions, or the elephants that you meet. If you look at the songs the then army used to sing, I can't say you one. For example, there was a song which was sung in Luo. Forget that this is a national army which is supposed to sing in Kiswahili or English. The song would be Kori 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 Ngode and Rikori Ye Ichena Joan Nerotiwa, that the spirits of the people have killed her in my face, the spirits of the people have murdered her in my eyes. How about NRA? You'd sing things like, okay, things like our country is envied by the imperialists. We should guard our country. And you'd sing in Swahili songs about imperialism, songs about protecting the country, and in Swahili. Now, the climax of this liberation came amidst this background, particularly the state. And you will see that over time and again, even as NRM, the party programs of the party manifesto at one time was so much on modernization or reform of the army, to make the army conform to its national aspirations and national nature. And this we have kept on pushing, even in the manifesto of the army. So the liberation, forget about the economic aspect and the other social aspect, of course, which came the increase in life expectancy from 43 to 64, the infrastructure that we are talking of. But at the gist, the day like today, the gist was the destruction of oppressive state machinery and the institution of a pro-people army. You could say, Dr. Ino will say, a counter-argument like citing incidences, okay? But even if you cite those incidences, we could have, you know that we professionalize the army to the extent that armies as dictates of in operation, for example, how operation is going to be executed. But in some way, there are operational codes that are violated. How an army is seen to be addressing this is, what are the laws in place? Do you have a court martial to try the army? Do you have counterintelligence to counter the misdeeds in the army itself? Do you try them? Do you punish them? Same thing with other state agencies. So it is true we had the liberation, okay? It's true we had the liberation, particularly when the liberation at that moment, before engaging in economic and social, was a target to transform the state machinery. Which state machinery? I've already explained that it was seen in the nature of the army, that you'd see what it is, that the explanations were completely abound. You would see, even where the army was, that on the ordinary, remember there are many public buses which used to have transport goods on top. The army would go with looted iron seats from people's home and looted things, openly carrying it. And you'd wonder, is this a national army? Okay. Under what circumstances, even if you're doing operation?
On that note, from what you have submitted, Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma, what are some of those elements that have been pointed out by Major Awit that seem to be resurrecting themselves in today's era, 40 years later, after the Liberation Day recognition?
I think we need to agree, and I think Major Pole is fair in that assessment, there was actually liberation. Well, we shouldn't deny.
Thank you, Doctor.
We shouldn't deny that 1980, the election that happened in 1980 wasn't free and fair. We shouldn't deny that the times were bad. Going to that election, we shouldn't deny that the country needed to be liberated. That's a fact. It's undeniable. So what we're looking at when you say 40 years on, we're looking at the journey of liberation, right? So that's Major Polly, to agree with you, the country needs to be liberated, right? So, and what we're looking at now is whether or not the country needs liberation, which I think the first part of your segment, your submission, you focused on what had gone really wrong. And to be fair, that actually gone wrong, they need liberation.
Thank you.
But we're looking at 40 years now. And among the other major reasons as to why the people picked 27 guns and went to the bush was because of a bad election, which was stolen. We didn't have evidence about the looting. We didn't have it, but there was popular sentiment the election had been stolen. But as we just concluded an election, two of the leading major opposition politicians in this country are all in difficult circumstances. Dr. Kizza Besigye is in jail. This is a leading opposition figure who stood in these elections plenty of times, about I think 4 times. He's in jail. He's been there for the last 4 years, rather 2 years. In fact, in the story here, in the Daily Monitor, there's a wonderful story here, following up on a letter by the Uganda Medical Association. And the details in the letter are quite mind-boggling. Maybe not mind-boggling, but make key reminders of where this liberation came. They say here that we must recall that Dr. Besigye is not a seasoned national leader, but a medical professional who played a gallant role in preserving the lives of our freedom fighters. This man...
In other words, that should count for something.
This man is in jail for 2 years. He's been denied bail, even on medical grounds. He can't get out. One of the other details in this letter, which is really revealing, he says, at a time when they had no other medical options, this man and their lives were in mortal danger, he availed his skills and laid down his life against all odds to ensure their survival. This federal liberator is in jail. The man who is the major opposition candidate in this election, with the concluded election, is on the run, being chased by our forces, the forces that you commendably say have been transformed. In fact, the CDF of these forces has said he's given him 48 hours to find him, and he's going to find him, and then he's proudly claiming to have killed Ugandans, calling them terrorists. So, you know, Major Paul, when you go back to before the 1980 war started, 1985 started, and look at the circumstances we're dealing with, one might actually say Uganda needs another liberation. Mm-hmm. You see, so to be fair, before 1980, this country needed liberation. And one could say again, that the things against which that liberation was built are in full swing now. In fact, to an even major degree. You know, he spoke about the song, and I said, should we become artists on this show?
No, but even when he spoke about the song, in today's era, there's still people that are singing liberation songs.
Yeah, plenty. There's a man who said, Bizemu. And when he sang that song, the song was banned. Bizemu, you see, lucky for you, the song was in Acholi, and it wasn't even banned. People would still sing it. There's Bizemu, it's a time bomb. There's plenty of songs which have been composed to underscore the dangerousness of the time. Right? So, Major Paul, to be fair, and I think as a fellow Ugandan, to be fair.
Thank you for your response. Major Paula, it's been 40 years of the NRA and its liberation, and of course the journey that you've painted us for, where we came from. We want to now assess the making of the 40 years. What have been the gains of the NRA and NRM, for that matter, in these 40 years that Ugandans can still hold on with pride today as they struggle to navigate what we have just gone through with the recent elections?
Oh, so much. But let me first comment about what my doctor said. It raises the issue of Dr. Besigye and alludes to his historical performance. There's no doubt that Besigye did that. For your information, there were 3 doctors, and Besigye was one of them. There was Dr. Bata, Ronald Bata. Bata hails from Moyo. Dr. Bata hails from Moyo, and he was actually a senior doctor. And then Dr.
I hope you don't say that to downplay his contribution.
No, I'm just stating you facts to enrich your horizon. Dr. Baingana was also a doctor. So Dr. Bata did that much, and Besigye, of course. So these people did their role, and it is recorded in history. And I think it's even mentioned in the Museveni's showing the mustard seed. Now, we can only look at Besigye's case in the broader view of the justice procedures. The justice procedures, if the country so sees that there's need to overhaul it, then let it be. If it is identified, as I always say, problem identified, this problem have. If you go into the field of justice procedures, including criminal justice procedures, it's so mixed up there. I'm an advocate myself. But sometimes delay in criminal proceedings are actually delayed by the supposed to be defendant, the accused. So you find the counsel on the side of the accused delays things. So looking at Besigye, or Besigye's case, should not only be looked in isolation. I would call on all of us to look at Besigye's case as a thing of a criminal justice procedures. Some of it are inherited from the colonialist, some of it too, I don't know how much we have tried to attempt to domesticate or to develop it. But all in all, the murky areas of criminal justice procedures, which causes delays and all this, is so mixed up in the hands of the lawyers and lawyers on both sides, either lawyers for the state or lawyers for the accused. So I would think that at some opportune moment, we could focus our gun on justice procedures, and it doesn't become a political matter. It ceases to become a political matter. It becomes a purely justice procedure matters, which we all need to have it sorted, because anybody is subject to conflict of laws. I could be accused in conflict of the law tomorrow. You could be accused in conflict of law tomorrow.
Okay, Major Paula, yes. That's all that you can say about Dr. Kizza Besigye. Let's talk about the gains that you can really attest to and give back to Ugandans that look here. In as much as the current affairs are looking the way they are and, you know, in a bad state, these are the positives that we could focus on as a country and hold on to for the maybe next 5 years.
The gains are many, Priscilla. Even if you start from the social psychology of the country, the social psychology of the country here mean how averagely the holistic country thinks. For example, Priscilla, you don't look like somebody from Arua or from Karamoja. But I can assure you, today, if you walk on the street of Arua, nobody would bother. Did you know that in the past, before this liberation, people who appear not to be in the area would even be killed for no reason? So one of the gains is the social psychology. The social psychology of the country now is that any Ugandan is a Ugandan. Whether you find Priscilla in the mountain walking in Arua town with her hips and her, is Priscilla, that is all. And if you find a Karamojong in Kabale, even if he's talking on phone to his people in Karamoja, who bothers? Is a Karamojong in Kabale is communicating in to Karamoja. So one of the gains is the social psychology of the country, that we have moved to that extent that we are one and our differences doesn't matter to anybody, anytime. That is achieved.
And yet differences don't matter. And just speaking from the statement of Babita Golanyi recently, the incident that she had in her home, she was being accused as to why she left all the men in her
I'm
cultures
talking of
and went
social
to Uganda
psychology. Social psychology, I meant the average thinking of Ugandans, okay? And this has been even fortified or reinforced recently. I'm so lucky about it, that even the voting pattern, at least averagely now, some people say painting it yellow. The voting pattern now shows that even in the areas that used to think that you are voting in a particular tribal tendency, it's now not there. You now see the whole country votes, whether uniform or everything, yellow. So that is such, but also in specific terms, I've already mentioned, Priscilla, that before the liberation, the life expectancy was 43 years. It is now 64. You can list them on that you as a mother or you as a lady, the maternal birth rate, death to the number of women who are supposed to produce and die is now reduced to 189. It used to be in thousands. And it was like a risk that our mothers would get pregnant, not sure whether in the attempt to produce, I will go out alive from the maternity ward.
All right. This
is drastically reduced. Infrastructure. I have repeatedly said that you can move now from any corner of the country to another border on tarmac, whether you are from South Sudan to Rwanda, whether from Congo to Kenya, whether whichever part of the country now you can access on tarmac.
All right.
And the list, you don't want me to list for you. Because
no, we're still having the conversation.
I wanted to list for you.
We do have a guest that we have
I can list
that
for
has
you.
joined our panel, Abdul Twaib Magambo. Thank you so much for joining us, Coordination Assistant for the Organizing Secretary of the National Unity Platform. It's a pleasure to have you, and good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
What is Liberation Day to you as a Ugandan?
Yeah, first and foremost, liberation is, in Uganda, liberation is a bit unfair. Why? It is something that is lacking. In 1980, when there was an election organized and His Excellency Obote won, the second candidate was Paul Kawanga Semogerere. And the last candidate was Yoweri Museveni, who resorted to going to the bush. He used an advantage of the anger within the populace. And of course, when he went to the bush, he was accepted. I came up with a 10-point program after the liberation, or after winning. But when you look at those 10-point programs, none is existing in its real form. If it is instilling democracy, it is not anywhere. If it is accountability, this regime and accountability are totally parallel. So when you talk about liberation in this our country, you mean nothing, absolutely nothing, because they stand parallel to the 10-point programs. Had they been moving in tandem with the 10-point program, you would say there is some bit of liberation. Otherwise, what is existing is a replica of what they
but
fought
before we
against,
look at what is
or
existing,
what took them to the bush.
What became of it after the country was liberated? Let's first look at that element. For example, let's first focus on the 20 years.
You see, world over, every leader who comes to the power, he comes with that dream of liberation. Even when Amin was overtaking Obote's government, he said, we have liberated our country. What came out of his 8-year rule was national plan and all those. But it was, it had some bit of development, actually national development, despite his personal flaw as a leader. But this our government, there is nothing when you roll back that has been put up or established by this regime. If it is not funded by World Bank, it is either IMF or African Development Bank. There is nothing that you can look at like a prodigious national project. that has been established totally and completely out of the national coffer. There is nothing out of the 40
Where does the PDM money come from? Myoga money and all
No,
the
you
other...
see the scandals and frauds that are fraught within the Myoga money.
But
There is a cabal of people who have mastered how to rob money from this regime. They use each and every government program. That is why each and every government program that is established, it is hitting a dead end. The Bonabagagawale, Operation Wealth Creation, they have not all realized even 50% of their aspirations. That is the kind of development you're talking about. There is nothing. It is only a lobbying spree for some people within the regime.
So regardless of the source of funding, do you not acknowledge that there's been some good socio-economic development to the country?
I think it is unfair if you ignore the source of funding. Why? Our debt burden exceeds $100 trillion. This is money that we are going to pay years and years, including our children's children.
$100 trillion?
Sorry, 100 trillion Uganda shillings. Uganda shillings, sorry, thank you for the correction. But this is some amount of money that we can't pay in our lifetime, not even our children. But we are looking for, actually, each and every day, you will find the Minister of Finance going to the Parliament, asking for more acceptance for loans. Literally, we are a developing poor country. I don't know whether you get my point.
All right, Major, let's go back to the beginning. Was the liberation intended primarily for the structures of government, especially from the national army downwards to the people, or it was intended for the people upwards?
Not only for the army upwards, it is the other way around. But let me comment about this before I answer that. My colleague says that we can't ignore the source of funding. True, we can't ignore the source of funding, but we also need to put it in its correct perspective. It is not true that a funding in a country must necessarily come from a country's, say, taxes. Many countries, including Japan and America, they're heavily indebted. If you look at America and Japan, they're the most indebted countries in the world. No country can operate without borrowing. That one you should know it. So it is not an offense to borrow. Two, even a country like Japan and Germany, for example, after the Second World War, they developed on a Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan was simply money picked from somewhere to put it. Where do you think Japan came from? Which was rubbed to the ground, completely to the ground. It was Marshall Plan, a money which was transplanted from somewhere, from America to Japan, from America to Germany. Germany is now the most developed or richest country in Europe, but this goes to Marshall Plan. So please, no country can go, or no financing of a national project can go without borrowing. Now, so I just wanted that cleared. So it is not wrong to borrow. Japan and America are the most indebted countries in the world. Okay, to your question, the liberation, I moved in because I wanted to give a picture of the climaxing of that element of liberation. That's why I only talked that, I said that at that time, the thinking was liberation from the army itself. But the intention of the liberation was a holistic view, to transform the country, which I have said to a big extent has been done, including democratic processes. And that is why you find that we are almost so democratic that we find ourselves even election fatigued, and it is affecting the turnout. How I wish, for example, there are more countries, Doctor, who even do more voting than us, by the way. For example, a country with a very developed democracy like Switzerland. Switzerland is, of course, you can't compare democracy like France in 1800, I mean Germany in 18, these are new countries. But Switzerland by 11, 13, 14, they're already a country. Do you know that in Switzerland, even a referendum of whether or not to stop smoking, people vote, a referendum. Should we abolish smoking? Should we prohibit? Even when the country decides there is uncertainty about opening bars, they vote. They hold a referendum.
So
and yet
the country that you're referring to is a neutral country that's never held a vote, has never gone through the atrocities that we went through as a country.
Yes.
So
what I'm saying is, that there is a broader aspect of the liberation, much as I'd climax it with the destruction of the army and the putting of a new army. But I'm saying it is broader, including democratic processes that we have done, including the assertion of Article 1 of the Constitution, power belongs to the people. That is part of the development, including the economic transformation, that now we don't need to line up for salt or line up for tea. Did you know, Priscilla, that before that, the beer that now advertises and even sponsors activities, football and the rest, that before this, the government would sit and allocate beers. Kitgum district, 100 crates. Tororo district, 50 crates. So these economic aspects that you now develop to the extent that instead of allocating goods, you actually have to struggle to advertise, to sell. So it is broad, democratic, economic, and otherwise.
The question of whether it was meant to be from the ground up or from up to down, the structure.
When you address the consumers,
we're going
you
to be taking
address
a short
the
break
people.
for you to digest what has been submitted on this table so far, and then we'll come back with the bigger questions. Do stay with us. And misses, as we do continue on reflecting on this milestone of 40 years of liberation as a country, the Republic of Uganda. Today is the 26th of January. Now, my guests in studio have given us some interesting submissions. Mr. Magambo has said, how do we measure liberation when we cannot even pay 50% of our own achievements or milestones that we have hit, especially economically and socially? Major Paula, which has given us a very good understanding of the backbone of liberation, especially from one of the national organs that we should be looking at as a country, and hailing it for standing strong, though now many are judging it, and that is the Uganda People's Defense Forces. Then you do have Dr. Serron Koma, who says that, well, in the earlier years of having been liberated as a country, there would even be a whole Chiromo, maybe 24 hours or 48 hours, just looking forward to memory of how as a country we have moved leaps and bounds, but we could be retracting on that today because he didn't have the meat that he talked about back in the day. He didn't have it last night. I don't know what he had last night. So that's where we stand right now. We do have our reporter on ground, Stephen Bide, that is joining us in Matuga, and he's also having a reflection of the same conversation. How liberated are we as a country 40 years down the road? Stephen Bide, good morning to you.
Yes, morning to you, Priscilla. In 1986, when General Yoweri Museveni stood on the steps of Parliament, he made a statement that this is not a mere change of guards, it's a fundamental change. And one of the issues in these 40 years that we've been seeing is the decentralization of power, where even the Constitution says power belongs to the people. But in this decentralization, we've seen also the election of LOC5 chairpersons, the mayors, and in this kind of administration authority, that's where we've seen also the election of mayors. I'm seated with the mayor for Lubaga Division, Zaki Mberaze Maula, who is also known by the people in Lubaga as Tata Namuli. Speaking about the 40 years of Museveni's rule,
yes, sir,
and the interim government in power.
Yes.
You are the mayor, you've been one of the people who have served under these 40 years, but yes, being as the mayor of Lubaga Division under NUP. First of all, good morning to you, and thank you for speaking to us.
Good morning, Mr. Ndide. Good morning, our viewers and everyone in the studio at that side. My name is Zaki Maula, Ekitata Namuli, Mayor of Lubaga Division. I've been here for the last 4 years, 4.5 years now, as the mayor of this division, and seeing that we are able to serve our people.
Decentralization, serving, you being one of the beneficiaries of the decentralization, leading the people of Lubaga. how is this bringing leadership closer to the people under NRM's 40-year rule? When you look at this 40-year rule, how is it for you as a leader of Lubaga division?
Of course, we can say some things have been done, but not satisfactory. The 40-year rule, of course, we look at a number of things. And the 40 years, as you have said, that this is not a mere change of guards. So it is about the 40 years have come in, but what have they done really in the 40 years? Because we have to look at the rule of law. They have the constitution, which is the 1995 constitution, changing of term limits, yeah? And then the rule of law also looking at the number of our people who are being detained. People's rights of freedom have been violated by the system. So we're looking at a number of that lives have changed, youths have been unemployed, many are unemployed, there's no minimum wage. So we find that there are a number of problems within the 40 years. So we don't say they have done much, but they have tried, but there's a lot which has to be done in order to say their country is moving at a better pace.
When you speak about bringing power closer to the people and bring service delivery to the people, you as the mayor, how has the NRM performed when you say you as a mayor, you are literally serving under the NRM government? Because yes, you are NUP, but being part of this, the entire government, you are also at the helm of leadership. Is the power closer to the people in real practice, or just in words?
I could say that if we are going to percentages, getting services down to the people through decentralization is a better good. It's a good thing. But again, the problem is that the funding or the budget for Kampala pay out of taxes compared to other areas in Uganda. About 70% of taxes paid to this government come from within Kampala city. But in terms of allocation of funds, you find that the funds allocated to do work on ground, the monies are not enough to help us to do service, to give our people who elect us good services, like, for example, the issue of doing drainage channels within our communities, funding like PDM, it's a PDM. But we find that a parish here is given 100 million per quarter. And also in the village, the same parish. But when you know that the parish of Kampala has more than 100,000 people within that parish, or 20,000 people. So you find that, and the other person, the parish in the village has about 1,000. So you find that the things being done here in Kampala, they're not satisfactory compared to what the government is earning within our city and what the demand even on ground, what it is. So be able, if we increase on the budget, by at least, if you have like, they're giving us 20%, because we need about 1 trillion, 2 trillions to every financial year to start to be able to give good services to the people of Kampala who elected us as mayors, that were like a mayor of Lubaga. We have a number of problems that are facing on ground which need a lot of funding from the central government.
Yes, when you speak about Lubaga, let's also bring it closer from Kampala to Lubaga. Yes, the population of the people is increasing, even in Lubaga division. But if you want to create and bring services closer to these people, and you're talking about the budgets, but what else, within your experience of the 4.5 years, what have you seen and discovered that needs to be done away from the budgeting to make sure that, yes, the people benefit from these services?
Yeah, of course, as leaders, we need more kind of, now we have an act, in case act, which they're trying to develop activities. From that act is a section under section 35, whereby the different services are supposed to be devolved to the divisions, which had not been done earlier. Many the last 4 years, we haven't had, those services have not been yet developed. But the case the authority is trying to see that those services under that docket, which are supposed under the first schedule of the act, are developed under to be at the division level as compared at the KCCA, whereby at this service, when we as leaders at the division, we are able to take care of those services as closer under the institution of the town clerk who is at the division. So I think that was the main problem. But those services at the end of the day, they need more funding, because you need to have must have run accounts which are not yet been created. We also have the central account, one central account from Ministry of Finance. So you find that the missing gap, the act is there, and it outlines all the activities supposed to be done at the vision, but the problem comes again under the financing of these activities, because everything that's supposed to be done under that system is about financing for health facilities. We have them, but we find that we need to upgrade our hospitals within the area. Take people coming from Masaka, from Tiana, all come to get these services from our divisions, because we have an health center here in Chitebi. We have now Kawala Health Center, which we are trying to upgrade to a hospital. So we find that these people to get good services, we shall need medicines, more doctors, more caretakers. You see that's where the gap is. Our people to get better. We need to do their channels. They should be constructed. We have the Kongo channel, which is a big channel, and whenever it rains, we get floods in those areas, water affecting the community and also their businesses. We have the Absesso channel in Luaga North, that's Kawala, and the Lunguja. That's another bigger channel affecting our community. So you find that these things, we need funding so that we can construct these channels. We can clean up many, having more workers, KC workers, even increasing in their allowances or in terms of salary. Those people who clean our community, they need to be, their money should be increased. If they're getting 6,000, it's 10,000 per day. So you find that all this rotates around funding to have a cleaner Lubaga and to have a better place. And also means of works. As fair to do Natete, that is Masaka Highway. There's a lot of problems, but the government system has a problem. But
even before we blame Ministry of Works, I saw some time when you were launching the old Masaka Road, the works from Natete at traffic lights, especially where there is that channel, but also government at some time, Ministry of Works and Prime Minister's office, were launching the Nakauka side, which is in Wakiso, coming towards Natete. Yes. What befell of that project? Because up to now, that road is not workable and it's not motorable. Okay, KCC had budgeted to do a box culvert at Nakauka, between that is Nakauka Road from Natete. That box culvert that we were trying to do. We excavated the place. When we started our works, and the money was available for that activity. Over now it was shifted, and we have done other drainages within Lubaga. Now, when we started the works, government, the Ministry of Works came and said, no, that one is a public, that is our own project. You leave that project and move and do something else. So after we moved, they came and signed on that project, but again, on the way, we don't know what happened, they took off. So our prayers that Ministry of Works should have come back, because what they're doing, they failed to get money for funding to compensate people along that road, Nakauka Road. The road, the way the road is moving is so slow compared to what I would have done, and Apple will be able to move and use that the road. But now they put a box culvert and they took off. Our people who are moving from Nakauka, from Natete going that side of town, it has created an impasse in that area. So I pray that the ministry should come up and see that it is able to conclude that project. Even the same thing for Masaka Highway. Masaka Highway, the same thing. Ministry of Works has failed. Many people in Natete, their businesses no longer work as they used to do. Transportation, everything is down in the Natete community. Even our police there is in a poor, and all that. So we find that there's a lot of problems. So we need the roads to be done. The ministry is very slow. I know what is happening in the Ministry of Works. We need because even the roads are doing here, at least they're faster than even the Ministry of Works. We thought there's a government that could help our community and see that they're able to give a good service to our community. So they have failed really. It's not good. I would want to understand if the people of Lubaga give you the mandate to lead them 2026, 2031, what would your vision would be? But before that, I would want to take you back to the issue of the 40-year rule of Yoweri Museveni and NRM in power. Political parties, we've seen many coming up, many of course, some going down. When you talk about going down like Federal Alliance, but you belong to NUP, it's a new party under NRM 40 years. There is PFF, there is Alliance for National Transformation, Commemorates Party, and other parties. When you talk about political freedoms and freedom for humanity, would you rate NRM on performance of civil liberties, but also the growth of democracy and good governance, linking it with the growth of new parties that we're seeing emanating day by day?
The parties can emanate day by day, but having a party under this regime and managing it is a very, very hard process. That's what I can say. If you have an opposition party and it is really in control of the opposition, so that they're the one able to represent those who are being oppressed, like NUP, is the hardest thing in this country. Because as they say that they don't want to have, in the way they feel they open space for political parties, but yet they closed it. You know, I'm trying to say they opened but closed it. Whereby, because anyone who comes up a party and the party comes represent the issues of those who are oppressed and so they can have a voice, those people will be attacked badly. Now you can see our president, His Excellency Chagulanyi, we don't know where he is. His home is under police, you know, he's under detention. The family is under detention in their own, they have a right to live in their country freely. So I am praise that the police and the government itself should see that it's able to protect equally all the Ugandans, not having oppressing or putting pressure on one side, because they are able to present the problems and the issues that affect the community and representing those who are oppressed within this regime. So our humble prayer that you open the space equally for everyone and play the game at an equal ground, not oppressing the other because he's opposing or is trying to represent those who are oppressed within the system, within the country. On a greater part of it, Kampala is now, literally you should say, is under your party, because Mayor-elect Engineer Ronald Balimwezo is NUP, is belonging to your party. But
all right, Stephen Bide there giving us what is on ground, of course reminding you that our elections are still going on. Different elective positions must be filled until the beginning of next month. There will be polls tomorrow for the other local government elective leadership positions, and so be mindful of that. Also, as we're looking to NRM, Uganda marking the 40 years since the NRA victory that fundamentally altered us as a country into political, social and an economic trajectory to which Major Paul Awich was trying to defend earlier on. For many Ugandans, the day ought to be marking a new beginning of peace, of stability, of institutional rebuilding, and a renewed sense of national purpose. We'll be bending this conversation towards what is the renewed sense of national purpose. Now, the theme for this year's celebrations that are happening at Kololo Ceremonial Grounds will be held under the theme Tribute to the Patriots who ushered in a fundamental change, which I believe is where Dr. Cyril Nkrumah was coming from when he was making a case of Dr. Kizza Besigye, because I believe he does fall under the Patriots his country looks to, that contributed to the liberation we so sit here 40 years later and speak of. Now, Dr. Yusuf, in that regard, when we are evaluating liberation, you've had the evaluation through the lenses of the NRM representative on the table. You've had the evaluation through the lenses of the other political players in our country. Should we be evaluating our liberation by the historical stability that is being talked about this morning? Should we be measuring and evaluating our liberation by democratic freedoms or the everyday realities of our citizens today?
I think all of those are yardsticks that should be put on the table when assessing the work that NRM has done. I think it should be fair that I think after 40 years, you know, from independence, 40 years, the man who has held Uganda for the last 40 years collectively has stayed in power for longer than all the others combined. Mm-hmm. So it's fair that in assessing his time, you assess him by his own standards, that you don't struggle to go further back and see what was happening before we came to him, right? And I think that's the challenge that Major Awich faces, is that And I think Museveni plays this game all the time. That in assessing himself, he has to constantly go back to Amin. But this is 40 years ago. You see, and the man was in power for just 8 years. And to be fair, in the 8 years...
You know, your submission has triggered me to think of that question they ask in a certain leadership class. What do you want to be written on your tombstone when you die?
Yeah.
That's what you are referring to.
I think the Indians would be like, who are better than Amin. They would love to say something like that on their tombstone. But...
you were giving credit somewhere.
One of the biggest cash cows that is the selling item that NIM prides in itself is peace and security, right? And I'll never forget, there was a moment in our history, in our time, not too long ago, when there were abductions of women and murdered in NTV. And it went on for about a year. Right now, I'll vividly remember the murder of, I think it was Joan Magara. I remember the president appearing at the funeral and admitting that his powers had been taken away from him, to the point that the kidnappers often told the parents of the victim that don't dare involve the police or the president, because they knew the parent had connections. And every time they did so, they were fully aware that he actually spoke to the president or to the police. To the point that at the funeral, at the burial of the victim, Museveni said there was nothing he could do. The only thing he could do was to come and announce to the family that your daughter has died. So if you pride in peace and security, remember the time when the man who died, Sobi, gave us reprieve as the country said, this Christmas time I'm not going to commit any crimes. You see, you know right now Daily Monitor has done wonderfully well in documenting the crimes of Nixon. What's his name? Agassi. He was a senior police officer. He rose through the ranks really quickly, has been committing crimes in the name of the security forces and tying them onto Muslims. You see, so if you pride in the things and all the things are sprinkled all over your resume as people who brought in peace and security, it's a very dangerous thing to say, right? And you see, when we talk about security and peace, there's a bigger point of security, which, and you know, I somehow fall in love with Daily Monitor nowadays. There's a story here, you know, reflecting, I think it's in the context of reflecting on the things that the NRM has done. Yeah. And somehow there's a story here, who owns and leads Uganda's banks, right? Because if you talk about security, you talk about financial security. Like the poor cannot speak about security because, you know, and there's something here that, and I don't know what is the thinking behind the Monitor editorial. And this is wonderful journalism. The way they frame the story, who owns and leads Uganda's banks? Because Minister Ezra Sruma told us that we will remain slaves if we don't own our banks. Now, in the 40 years that Paul's government has been in power, 89% of our banks are foreign owned. 89%. That's the figure in Daily Monitor today on page 12. And that tells you about this country. Mr. Magambo spoke about eloquently about how we fund our infrastructure. You said 50%. No, it's 100%. It's not this. This government has borrowed, Major Awich, in our name, in the names of our children, 2-year-olds, as of last year, 2.5 million. The 45 million Ugandans, Yoweri Museveni has borrowed in our name, 2.5 million we have to pay back, including kids who have not started working in primary school, nursery school. Museveni has borrowed in their name 2.5 million. And then you turn around and you say your pride in building energy sector. By the way, one of the insiders of the NRM told us this thing is going to collapse in the next 2 years. So if you pride in building this infrastructure, the question would be, how are we able to fund this? Because we're the Pearl of Africa, supposedly the richest country among the rich ones on the African continent, but we can't fund ourselves. You see, and credit to Mr. Magambo, who mentioned IMF and the World Bank funding the things. Because what Museveni has done to stay in power for the last 40 years is to hand over this country to IMF and the World Bank. You see, and that's the danger and I've said in most of my writing, Major Poli, that Museveni is the quintessential example of a colonial caretaker. That what he has done so wonderfully well is to take over, to care, is a version of Semeika Kunguru or Aldina Vizram, taking care of the space on behalf of those people. Because you can see, this is a country where you don't own our banks. 89% are foreign owned, so we have just 11%. What type of country is this, where you can't even own our banks? You see, the PDM, I've never seen a government which turns itself into a credit facility. The government turns into a credit facility, giving people money. So if you give, but also the danger with PDM, Mr. Magambo, you said it's not really about the scale. The idea is built on false ground. A government cannot be a credit facility. A government has to... Let me finish this point, Priscilla. A government has to create the ground for people to access credit easily. NTV did a story, which was mind-boggling, where people in this country access credit at 40% interest rate. It doesn't. Nobody grows in a country where you access credit at 40% interest. So if government gives me money, if government gives me say 5 million, and I start investing, and somehow, by some magic, I'm doing wonderfully well. At that point, I go up to, my business is now 50 million. I can't return to government for more money. I have to go to the bank. And then when you go to the bank, the interest rate is 40%. So you see how it's messed up.
We see the direction that you're taking us. Mr. Magambo, on the backbone of what has been submitted and what you were putting forth earlier on, should Liberation Day be reframed? And now we are moving away from the economics of things. There's also another element that is biting at the celebration of liberation for us as a country, and that is the generational perspective. We must be mindful of that, because at the end of the day, this is a force that has come. UBO statistics show us that this force is here, and it has the power now to tilt certain things of our country. So in that regard, should Liberation Day be reframed to speak to the present day challenges, such as unemployment, such as the political inclusion and the governance?
Of course, the astute and explicit definition of liberation is the ability to meet the challenges, address them in their real form. That is the real meaning of liberation. But longevity or monotony of a regime or government drives the regime or the government out of that course. People in government or in state reach a point of being insulated from reality, what is exactly happening on ground. In so doing, there is a total inconsistency with what the real meaning of liberation is. Why? You see, as people or as leaders stay in power, their aspirations value with time. They switch from national development to power enrichment, longevity in power, and the likes. And in the course, you find that the expenditure of the national budget are in line with such. For instance, I can give you an example. Ever since 2021, the government of Mr. Museveni has asked for over $85 trillion, shillings, in supplementary budget, and in which more than half of that is in classified expenditure, whereby you don't question it. This classified expenditure is the money that is given to all sorts of people in order for the regime to grip its energy onto what? Power. But half of that can be like 40 trillion Uganda shillings. 40 trillion Uganda shillings is almost 70% of our national budget. Just imagine all that money if it was invested into developmental work. How wealthy or how developmental would be by now. So in the course of liberation has to lead him exactly with what the national demands are. We are having a country whereby over 70% of the country populace is below the age of 30. And when you dig deep into the 70%, over 80% of that 70%, most of them are unemployed people. You find people employed, but in actual sense disguised unemployed. So you have to address a challenge of unemployment within the largest bracket of your population, which is this government is not doing. There is a challenge of corruption. This government and corruption are in the same basket. Actually, it is prospering and prospering. Simply, it is living and surviving on corruption. You've seen how leaders have been corrupted, how leaders have been co-opted. As long as the regime overstays in power, the best they can do is corruption and co-optation through corruption. So if they are doing it, the national agendas are put aside. When you dig deep into the developmental goals of this our country and how our budget is spent, you realize that they are not flowing in the same direction.
Okay. On that note, Major Polawich, there's a psychological saying that says, you know, when you're 0 to 18 years, you can blame all the situations, all the people around you for your shortcomings and your failings. After that, responsibility is in your hands for what becomes of you at the end of your lifetime. That is to say that we have had the stories, you were there, others were not there, and that's a reality now the NRM has to face. So in light of that reality that some were pre-1986 and others are now post-1986, where do we stand in terms of the NRM maybe reshaping and redefining liberation for us as a country in light of the present constraints and opportunities?
Thank you so much. Just one other clarification on what my colleague has said. It is not true that classified money's budget is not questioned. Under the law and under the procedures of Parliament, there's a committee of Parliament that looks into classified budget, and the committee is known. It is set as a committee of Parliament. So that only that, because of the
looking at the figures, not the
sensitivity
not the
of this,
exactly.
And they take, in quotes unquote, another oath of allegiance, because if you're saying you're buying these tanks and to protect the country, sometimes you don't need to announce to the world, or these bombs. So it is not true that classified money is not questioned. It is questioned by a relevant committee of Parliament.
But there is always a budget for Ministry of Defense.
Yes, I'm talking of classified budget. Classified budget is not true that it is not questioned. There's a committee of Parliament that is mandated to question classified budget.
On to the question asked.
Yeah. Now, in the question that you have put, I like to put it in this way, that this liberation should only be seen in a person in the village or in his household. How does this liberation feel in his livelihood? For example, in a livelihood where we are saying we got one hydropower, now we have 4, does it reflect on that person's lighting or whatever system he wants to use that energy? We have expanded and it is there. Security. He has talked about some challenge sometime. Normally there will be challenge in society, like in the NTV and the rest. Does that person sleeping in that house, call her Mary, does Mary feel that she can sleep and feel it and there's nothing disturbing? Poverty, it has been decreased from 20 to 16. Does Mary in that house feel that I have electricity, I sleep well, and the poverty is reduced? Health, we have built health centers to now at a constituency level, there's LC3 level, and health facilities. I've already talked of mother mortality. Does that Mary in her house feel this? So these are indicators, the feelings that feels in a person. And that person is able to form a consciousness, whether there's liberation or not. And that person most likely is going to reflect it in the 5-year mandate given to her to elect a new leader. And that is it. And that's what I've always said, that no amount of guns or helicopters or whatever will keep NRM in power. It is judged on the basis of these indicators. And somehow you think that that person is not feeling. But he feels it. Mary feels it in the house, and it comes into her consciousness. And that's why you see the whole country is painted yellow.
Can I quick comment on health? In Busoga, there's a thing we call Jamila Jene. You know, life expectancy has gone up world over for so many things happening, like advances in science and technology, where we have zero contribution. We're consumers. When you look at, for example, PEPFAR, a very big program where people have access to antiretroviral care. American bought the part and gave it to us. You know, this, like for example, we have ChatGPT where you can go and check things, and we have zero contribution whatsoever. So there's so many things happening across the world. If you go to Somalia, where there's almost no government, they will tell you about growth in, you know, life expectancy. So there are things which are happening. To put healthcare in context, when President Milton Obote was shot at, he was treated at Mulago Hospital. Our political elite are dying in foreign hospitals, in Nairobi, in Germany, and elsewhere. The president actually told us he doesn't trust Ugandan doctors. So this is the healthcare you're bragging about. What was Myagoja's position? Was she Attorney General? She told us when her husband passed that Mulago Hospital is a museum. And to give you good context, if you read the book The Patient by Dr. Olive Kopsinje, Dr. Olive Kopsinje does this wonderful job of giving us a picture of Mulago Hospital under the time of Idi Amin and the previous governments. That place was the leading health facility in sub-Saharan Africa.
Doctor, it was my time.
So if you pride,
it was my time.
You said so many falsehoods about our health.
And being a disciplined cadre that I am, I left you talk.
I asked, and you allowed me to do it.
Being a disciplined cadre that I am, I left you talk.
That being said, let me help you both gentlemen. From the perspective of the NRM, they put up something. It may not be to the pedigree or, you know, the measurement that you are measuring.
And they love comparing themselves to Amin.
No, and that's what I was telling him. That's what I was asking him. That how
Amin
do
was
we
a miracle
separate
to this
ourselves?
country.
Because at 40 years as an adult, you can no longer blame other people for the poverty. You can no longer blame other people, if you're a man, for not taking care of your own household. At 40 years, you cannot be blaming the Obote regime or the Amin regime. You ought to blame yourselves and get these fingers and point them at yourself. So in that perspective, Major Awit, which are those fingers that are pointing at you as the NRA, NRM, that indicate weaknesses that have not led you to perform to the expected ability?
You see, I am alive to the fact that we are not going to judge by history. That is why I picked the ideal Mary. Mary living now in our house. Let's say Mary is living in Masindi. I had said Mary will judge herself by the energy power in our house. I said Mary will judge herself by the security of her sleeping. I said that Mary will judge herself by the reduction of poverty.
The Mary that you're talking about.
I have not talked about Mary comparing with Amin. I'm not talking Mary comparing with
about
Obote.
Mary. Let me ask about Mary. Where is this Mary situated?
An ideal Mary. Put it anywhere. Put it anywhere.
We
just
can put
ideal.
this Mary in
or you can
Karamboja?
even remove Mary. Put Peter. Put Mary. No. Put Peter.
Can we put this Mary in Karamboja?
Yes. Put in Karamoja and check.
And they have
check the indicators. No, not Colon. The indicators.
In this our economy, each and every one is demanded more than 2.5 million. Despite the light in their houses.
They're in debt. 2.5 million. Mary and her children.
So, you're taking advantage of the discipline card, really. Because of my discipline, I'm letting you intervene. Me, when you're talking, I don't. Now,
there's people who are asking, what type of phone is Mary using? What type of medication is Mary receiving? For how is she not flown out of the country?
You see, there's a minimum checklist. There's a minimum checklist which affects the well-being of a person. If you're going to extend checklists to everywhere, for a normal person or an average person,
we're not extending
an average person
everywhere.
Is that
we are putting a checklist
the
to
basic
see
needs.
If the Mary that you're talking about is a Mary that can be resonated to by the Mary that is up north of this country.
Yes, that's why I'm judging. That's why I'm judging by the basic needs of a person: healthcare, security, food, shelter. These are the health. That's why I'm positioning Mary in that ideal position. A Mary that needs shelter in her house, on our roof, a Mary that needs to be healthy, a Mary that needs children to go to school, and we have schools.
What's the quality of shelter Mary's having? What's the quality of electricity she's having? When
you see, and that's why I'm surprised that you're extending. I'm surprised that you're extending the indicators that far. You can't talk of quality of life. For example, yesterday I was seeing
indicators thus far because this is where we are supposed to be.
Are these 5 or 6? Okay. So these indicators point to, it leads to the person feeling, because we feel a sense of touch, smell, and body. So that person that we are talking about will be the judge whether things are good, whether there's liberation or not. And we have just gone through election that this Mary felt in this last election that I should vote for NRM, and indeed he voted. And that's why you see yellow everywhere. That is the sense of judgment, how you feel in your body, in your food, in your health, in your education, and that forms your conscience, and you vote otherwise, okay? So we have these indicators. You can't say the quality of a house. I've seen yesterday some people having $30 million house. So are we going to judge at that?
Can I give some information? Some information?
You are going to intervene.
No, just a sentence. Just a sentence. Just a sentence. In this country, 45 million people, only 1% earn more than $1 million. Please continue.
I don't know the import there, but what I am still insisting is, if you judge an ideal person in Uganda vis-a-vis the checklist of the requirements, shelter, health, education, security, all these are available, and it is judged on what has been invested in.
Thank you, Major. So it's not so much about the quality of the things that he has mentioned, but the fact that they are available to as average and a Ugandan as possible. That's their measurement of success or indicators of success for the liberation that they have given to this country, 40 years and counting. Mr. Magambo, in your perspective, how do you measure against, how would you measure them against what they refer to as successes?
Yeah, the greatest successes that NRM brags about is peace and security. But you have to roll back the hands of time and question about security.
You guys are against history. Now you're bringing history.
Your leader always goes back to history. You see, in 2004 in Bushenyi, when they were burning Donozia Tewerondwa, the current Minister of Internal Affairs, General Kahindo Tafire, said they used to put on attires of UPC government, go in the wee hours, kill people, and do all sorts of evil. And in the morning, people become more angry. Literally, it was insecurity castigated by themselves. So it is like me coming here and I destroy NTV. The following day I come here with a full truck of new equipments. It is like I'm giving you the right hand, yet I used my left hand to take away what you had. Security was there.
They even have Muslim.
But not to the magnitude that is portrayed by the NRM regime.
Fake Muslim names.
Insecurity was there, but when you dive into it to find the exact fact, you find that almost much of it was being orchestrated by the people who are in power today. Why? To label the existing government back then as evil as they wanted. And of course they won. The other issue about economy and national development, I think we can spend here the entire day poking holes into what they portray as grim light.
Okay.
Priscilla, just a quick comment. One of the biggest things as to why they're not going to the bush, and the things that Ugandans are hungry to see, and I think that's why we're in a nervous state right now, is democratic transfer of power from one person to another. At 40 years now, those chances look very, very slim. But now our 82-year-old president...
You know, institutionally they don't exist. Like, don't even say slim. They don't.
They don't exist institutionally.
If you take away the term limits and the age limits, then what do you
can
have?
Go on. One of the key things, if you look back on Museveni's speeches, civilization was judged by not overstaying in power and handing over power peacefully. If our 82-year-old president has stood again to take his age to 87 as president, this is why we are so nervous as a country, that the thing that took Museveni to the bush to deliver, he has held on to it and refused to give to the country. To the point now that I don't worry about Museveni failing to deliver on anything. That's stopping my worry about 5 years ago. I worry about death in office. You see, it's this thing that should be the major talking point on this so-called Liberation Day in the 5 years of Museveni's new term, is the thing that Uganda hankers for, is at what point do we say we moved from President so-and-so and the former president is seated there listening to the speech of the current president? That is the thing we are looking forward to. That's the thing that Museveni promised to deliver to this country. And that should be a major yardstick against judging the liberation. All
right, speaking of major yardsticks, as we take a bend to this conversation, what should Liberation Day represent going forward? Major Polawich.
Liberation Day going forward will represent, or should represent, the dignity of a Uganda, or anybody living in Uganda, whether it's Ugandan or not, how free he is to engage with others, and should also reflect what this Ugandan eats in the morning and at lunchtime and during the day. What this Ugandan, which does children go to school in Uganda? Does this person sleep freely and move freely from one corner of the country to the other? Okay? So it's about the independence is not a concept in ideal. It's a concept in practicality. And we measure in each and every individual and into the individuals forming the collectivity. Okay? That is when we shall see that we are liberated.
Mr. Magambo, moving forward, what should Liberation Day look like for Ugandans? Should it look like a celebration as what we're having at Independence grounds today? Should it be looking like reflections or accountability?
I think a pile of all those you have mentioned. But in addition to, liberation in its real sense should have a real work plan of how to hand over power democratically. Like transition. Just like Doctor has said, you can't be in power for 40 years and you say you can't hand over power peacefully to anyone. Even within your circles, there is no someone worthy being your
after all
replacement after 40 years.
Trainings.
Like, you wonder the kind of liberation. Perhaps it was a self-liberation. Maybe we need to dive into that and we assess which kind of liberation was it, or what they are trying to mean. Was it a family liberation? Was it a tribal liberation? Was it a party liberation? Or a national liberation? But if it was a national liberation, I think it will never be as real as they portray it. In summary, you see, the greatest catastrophe that General Museveni is bringing to this our country is living longer in power. Why? There is no country world over that has had a leader exceeding 30 years of good or bad rule and left his country and it remains intact. Not even Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew, who transferred it from a third world to a first world country. Yeah. Of course,
we're talking about the democratic countries.
Exactly.
The monarchy.
No. I am comparing both. However good or bad a leader may be, once you exceed more than 30 years, you become a catastrophe yourself to the country. Your post-leadership time is in tatters. You see, when Museveni was coming to power, he said the greatest challenge of Africa are not the people, we, me and you, and those who are watching us, but leaders who overstay in power. That is him. So I wonder how out of the blue he becomes good by overstaying in power and the people become bad.
Maybe it's not us to judge what he meant when he referred to himself overstaying in power. Maybe for him it was 100 years, whereas you were thinking 20 years.
You see,
years,
there is an interview he made on Al
terms,
Jazeera when he was asked about it. He said, it is Ugandans who vote for me.
Because if it's the same person who, you know, when they were making the 1995 constitution, put those terms,
Yeah.
and the very same person who then foresaw those terms being taken away, then maybe it's not us, it's not in our judgment, but in conclusion.
Yeah, as I conclude, you see, despite the tone he used while expressing those words, we have a challenge as a country, and this challenge calls for, I can call it national unity. I am ignoring the platform because it will be turning into our party. National unity. We are just from an election that was more or less a selection process. This one is saying they have voted for NRM across. But my friend, when you go deep in Bunyangabo, Bundiwiju, and where all those Lulo districts, it was more or less an activity that was conducted by the army.
Okay.
So, if we are to realize the country that we all envision to have,
Yeah.
we must be patriotic.
That's where I was actually going to conclude it with Dr. Serron Kuma. Maybe perhaps it's now time that we rethink patriotism and where we can place it in the foundations of our country moving forward.
I think Magamba has opened a good point, that at some point I've argued that we need to step outside of elections. We need to step outside of elections. Yeah.
How else then?
I mean, countries imagine themselves in many different ways, away from the facade and circus of elections. Because you see, in this country, we have pretended that we can compete against Museveni and beat him. We pretended that. It's a pretense we've embraced and we carry. And that's my problem with the NUP people and many opposition groups, is the pretense that Museveni can organize an election and it is fairly competitive and you can beat him. It's a pretension that we've embraced and we carried for long. I think maybe Magamba may not say it because it belongs to the NUP, but I think it's high time we stepped out of the election circus, sat down as a country, honestly ask how much time does Museveni want to finish whatever he has to finish. Maybe he needs another 10 years, we say, okay, have it. Nobody's going to compete against you because we waste money and resources, people are thrown in jail, people are killed in the pretension that we are competing against him, only for him to come back in his life as usual. So maybe to ask him, so in your estimate, how much time do you need to finish whatever? If he needs 20, he will say you can have it. Because the pretension that we'll beat him in an election is wrong. Also, we can't force him out. Because if you look at, you go around this country, we are like an occupied country. We're not different from apartheid Israel. So we're like occupied. Okay. So the fair things to do is say is, in building this country, we need to sit down and ask Mr. Museveni, how much time do you need? And maybe so that everybody looks to that part, and then we can say, okay, now we can have an election without Museveni as a candidate.
It's been wonderful having this conversation with you. Liberation Day is here and it's before us and upon us. We will celebrate, but at the same time, much has to be reflected on, especially towards the future of our country and its democracy as well as governance. That brings us to the end of Morning at NTV. Thank you so much for watching. I am Priscilla Regina Naroga. Have a good morning.